Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 211, I chat with media technology consultant Paul Briscoe about lip sync issues and many other things that SMPTE, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, is working on today for tomorrow. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded June 19th, 2014. Episode 211, Loose Lips Sync TVs. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by NatureBox, where you can order great tasting, healthy snacks delivered right to your door. Forget the vending machine and get in shape with healthy, delicious treats like cherry vanilla granola. To get 50% off your first box, go to naturebox.com/twit. That's naturebox.com/twit. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week, Paul Briscoe returns. He was here last week. He's a media technology consultant, and we're going to be talking more about SMPTE standards and difficulties in the audio-video environment and how to overcome them. Hey, Paul, welcome back.
Hello, Scott. Thanks for asking me back. It was a pleasure last week and a treat to be back with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This time we won't be dealing with universities shutting off your bandwidth because of live streaming, I'm happy to say.
Yeah, well, sadly, we made it right to the end and I missed the last question, but thankfully I wasn't answering it and it ended up working out.
It was seamless, completely seamless.
Completely.
This time you're at home, so we shouldn't have any problem at all, and I'm really glad because we got a lot to talk about. Now, before we get started, I do want to make sure that those who are watching live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions as we go along, and I'll pass along as many as I can. Now, Paul, after the show last week, you had mentioned something to me that is actually causes great consternation, not only to me, but to most people who have home theaters and watch TV, and that's the issue of lip sync. Very often, probably most often, as you're watching a movie or a TV show or something, the video and the audio do not sync up, and this becomes most apparent when you're watching somebody talk, and you see their mouth move, and then you hear their voice, or you hear their voice before their mouth actually moves. And that can be very distracting. Give us a little background on why this is even a problem.
Well, you know, the problem to some degree is as old as media itself, but for a long time, it wasn't really a very significant problem. So if you consider cinema, the very earliest days of cinema, there really wasn't a lip sync problem with silent movies. The piano player could adapt to the images on the screen. And as time went by and we added sound, we ran into a separate sound production process from a video production process or a picture production process. And in film, this is okay. You go off and you mix your sound, you go off and you cut your film, and you come back and you put everything back together and you print out to something where audio and video is in sync. And because of the tight control in cinema, keeping that maintained through the theatrical presentation isn't too big a difficulty. You know, they'd load up the mags, they load up the film, they'd sync it up and play it. But there was manual intervention involved in the process at every step. Now, if you consider TV, TV has always been a very direct thing until recently. And when I say direct, I mean that there was a little electron beam in a camera scanning across an image sensor, producing an electrical signal, which quite literally was no more than milliseconds away from the viewer's screen, painting that beam back on the screen. At the same time, the mic is picking up the sound. The sound is going through very, very simple production processes and arriving at the speaker at the home set, again, very, very quickly. And the opportunity for them to get out of sync really didn't exist. Now, fast forward a little more in television into post-production, and suddenly you take audio away like in film, and you mix it separately, you come back, put it together. That's all great. as long as your QC is working and you can keep an eye on your output. And again, you broadcast here and it's all fine. However, we arrive at this era called the digital era. And the digital era brought delay to signal processing because we can quantize the signal and we can do really cool things with video and with audio in the digital domain. The problem is it takes time. And television systems are inherently synchronous. So when you take a video signal and you go and you process it, you probably end up delaying it a frame or two, but you need to resynchronize it to bring it back into the production system. So now consider you take your audio off down one path, your video down another, and you do some processing, and you put them back together without any human intervention in a distribution system. You now have the opportunity for audio and video to separate. Even worse in the digital era now is compression, because we now apply digital compression and decompression to both the audio and video, and it may happen several times in the production process, in the plant, in servers, through distribution, through final distribution to the home. And these are all opportunities for different paths to endure different delays so that when it finally gets to the home, the video and the audio are no longer in sync. Then there's one more problem, and that has to do with MPEG distribution. MPEG is a wonderful standard. It was well conceived, it was well designed, and how to generate an MPEG signal is very explicitly defined in the standard, ISO 13818. What is not defined normatively or explicitly or in a mandatory way is how a decoder shall behave. So even MPEG, and everybody knows this at home, if you're on a channel with bad lip sync, you switch away and you switch back and the lip sync gets better sometimes. This is because the decoder manufacturer cut corners, did not have a standard to comply to, so they took whatever liberty they wanted in establishing lip sync. So we have systems in place today that are incredibly complicated, from image capture to image presentation. And there's variable delays in video and audio throughout the system, and although there may be mechanisms in place to fix it, they don't always work. So we have a world today now where it's quite possible, even in professional presentation domains, to get video and audio separate in time.
Now, just let me make sure everybody understands that MPEG-2 is a type of what's called codec, coder, decoder, a compression algorithm, really, that reduces the amount of data that gets squirted across wherever it's going. And it's been the standard one that we've used for quite a while now. There are some other ones coming down the pike, but certainly for TV broadcasting, it's still MPEG-2, right? They haven't switched away from that.
Well, MPEG-2 consists of two aspects. There's the MPEG-2 compression standard, and there's the MPEG-2 transport stream. And other compression formats besides MPEG-2, such as MPEG-4, can use the MPEG-2 transport stream. The synchronization mechanism lives actually in the transport stream.
Oh, okay. So it's a separate thing from the actual data compression.
That's correct. But again, if you're a set-top box manufacturer, say you build a set-top box to decode MPEG-2 and MPEG-4, you may cut some corners and you may have a delay of, say, I don't know, three frames in MPEG-2 and 5 frames in MPEG-4. So you set up a fixed delay of 4 frames for both modes. So you're building, you know, a decoder where most people won't notice the nature of the problem unless there's a problem incoming that adds to the problem in the decoder. And decoders, as I say, sometimes vary quite wildly in their behavior.
Right. So what is the way that MPEG-2 tries to solve this problem that gets it into trouble?
Well, MPEG-2 uses timestamps to timestamp the video and audio streams, as well as a reference clock stream at the outgoing point of the encoder. And if everything's in sync there, those timestamps at the receiver, when realigned, will generate audio and video in sync. The problem occurs when decoders, again, take shortcuts or don't implement a decoding algorithm that's as smart as it needs to be. And again, it's not been made normative in the standard. So a lower-end decoder may not behave as well in terms of locking audio to video or maintaining that over time. And that's sometimes why when you switch away and switch back, the decoder resets itself, relocks to the stream, and does a better job of establishing audio-video lock.
Mm. Now, Eric Duckman in the chat room is asking a great question, which is, what is the least amount of lip sync error, I will say, that we can detect? How close is close enough?
Well, so here's an interesting story. First of all, we have an organic predisposition to hearing audio after we see the image. This has gone on since the beginning of time, and this is because of physics. So when you're watching the ball game from up in the bleachers, they swing the bat, it hits the ball, and you hear the crack sometime later. And this is normal.
Right.
And we can actually
when you see lightning, then some seconds later, you hear the thunder, depending on how far away it is.
Right. And I use my old rule of 1,000 feet per second, and that's kind of close for lightning.
Uh-huh.
And we're kind of used to that. And in fact, a frame of film is about 40 feet. So a couple of frames of film delay is about 80 feet of physical delay from the speakers. So we're quite used to that kind of delay. And it was thought for a long time we could tolerate a fair bit of that. The problem actually is asymmetrical. So we can tolerate a frame or two in film or video terms of delay before it becomes noticeable and objectionable to us. We cannot, however, tolerate sound coming before the picture very well at all. In fact, we can detect it very, very quickly when it's happening. And it really, really grates our brains. There were studies done, in fact, that show that for spoken audio delivered before the video resulted in a lot of viewer discomfort. And in fact, to some degree, disbelief in the content that was being presented. So there's a big problem around that. And today it's thought that lip sync needs to be well within a frame. Certainly audio, not more than a frame before video, and no more than a frame or two after video. For contribution purposes, a lot of people now are simply specifying lip sync absolutely in time. No opportunity for a plus minus 1 frame error.
Mm-hmm. And 1 frame at, I'm trying to think of the math now. 1 frame at 60 frames per second is what, 16 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds?
Yeah, 16 milliseconds.
16 milliseconds.
Right.
So that's at 60 frames. At 30 frames, it's more, and at 24, it's even more. So it depends, I suppose, on the frame rate to some degree.
Well, certainly it does. I mean, your perception of it is going to be tied to the frame rate. If you only have a video sample every 24th of a second, then it's going to take a while, a lot longer, or a larger delay for you to see it. But it also is content dependent because, for example, if you're watching music and they take a close-up of the drummer, when he strikes the skin, that sound had better be really, really tight, as opposed to a talking head, at news desk depth, which isn't quite so critical. The other problem we have today, of course, is HDTV. With old standard def TV, and this is particularly in the broadcast domain, but with standard def TV, you didn't really have the resolution to see enough detail to really pick up anything but gross lip sync cues. Now, of course, you can see every little wart and freckle. And it means you can really, really see when the lip sync is out.
I certainly understand what you're saying about when you're watching a music video and they close in on the drummer. I've noticed this all the time, and in fact, I use it sometimes to dial in lip sync in my receiver or whatever if it's particularly gross. But that's not really a good solution, is it? Because it's going to change from one program to another, even.
No, exactly right. And depending on the distribution medium, you may find it's different on one distribution medium than another. Perhaps you have more than one device in your home, so you can set up your home theater for your HDMI, say, coming from your satellite receiver, and then you switch to your internet receiver of some kind or your set-top box, and it may have a different audio-video flavor to it. And so now your theater system needs to be recalibrated if you can't tweak the box itself. So it's a complicated kind of problem.
Yeah. Sandblaster in the chat room is saying, we had a lot of sync problems in the early days of HD TV on the retail sales floor because the video and audio cables were different. I remember calling a manufacturer, he says, and they had not even heard of this problem yet.
That's a surprising source of the problem. I can't tell you why that would occur.
But in any event, Web 9385 is asking, so how does the lip sync setting in, say, a THX receiver work?
Well, it works by delaying or advancing the audio with respect to the video. So it'll delay the video by some small amount and then allow the audio to be either advanced or retarded with respect to that. Mm-hmm. So it's running a pair of buffers inside the device, and then one of them is running at a fixed time and the other one is user adjustable until the output, as heard and seen, matches expectation.
So other than the time stamping that you mentioned earlier, is there any other way to sort of automatically take care of it as it exists today?
Well, there are proprietary solutions available. A number of manufacturers have, over the years and even still today, manufactured point-to-point solutions. These are devices, these are boxes you buy, and you put them in the signal chain, one at the head end where you believe lip sync is correct, and one downstream where the lip sync may not have been maintained. And then through some proprietary method, these devices will look at the lip sync arriving at the destination and then use whatever means they have to either at least display what's going on, if not autocorrect it. And there's quite a number of solutions available, but there's some problems with these solutions. And the biggest one is that they're not interoperable. They're all proprietary. So if I buy brand X lip sync solution today, next year I have to buy more brand X lip sync solution because brand Y, Z, A, B, and C don't work with brand X. And in fact, none of them particularly interoperate. The other issue with them is they use some proprietary techniques, most particularly some use watermarking of the video and audio. And while watermarking is really quite cool and works fairly well, it does not withstand signal processing very nicely. So when we up and down convert pictures, for example, an HD picture goes down to SD for distribution over the cable network, some watermarking systems do not recover well after that kind of signal processing.
What would a watermark consist of? Some sort of little piece of data that you can't see or hear, obviously.
Yeah, that's the idea. There's a million, I shouldn't say a million, but there probably are a million different ways to watermark. They all involve burying something that can't be seen or can't be heard, which is always a source of debate, but putting something into the content that can later be extracted back from the content, but it's actually modifying the content in a non-artistic modifying kind of way to put this this marker in. Another problem with watermarking is it's used for many things. Nielsen uses watermarking and so on. So your watermark for lip sync may get interfered with by a subsequent watermark that's added by somebody else, which you may interfere with them as well.
Yeah, if everybody's inserting their own watermarks, it could really be a problem.
Right.
So this is obviously a big problem. I know tons of readers and viewers email me and talk to me about it and how to fix it. And we've been talking about some of the solutions. None of them really are very good. Fortunately, SMPTE, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, for which you consult, is working on a solution. Why don't you tell us about that? Well,
yeah, and I'm pretty excited about this. In fact, what we've come up with at SMPTE is, maybe I should backtrack a second here. This has been a long-term activity of the SMPTE. It started off as a study nearly 10 years ago to look at the problem and the nature of the problem and solicit solutions for the problem. And about 4 years ago now, we had a proponent come forward and say, we have a technology that we'd like to put forward for standardization. We'd like to make it available to be standardized. Even though it's our proprietary technology today, we would like to see it standardized. And we looked at the method, and that's become the basis of this SMPTE standard, which is under development. And we're getting fairly close. So I can tell you later on where we are in the process. The way this works is kind of ingenious, and it works by not modifying the content at all. What it does instead is it uses a couple of simple algorithms, one to analyze video and one to analyze audio. And it generates fingerprints from the media. So for every video frame, an algorithm, and when I say simple algorithm, I mean one that's simple and inexpensive to implement in hardware or software. This algorithm looks at the video
doesn't require heavy-duty processing, in other words.
Not at all. That was one of the key elements here, was to make something that could be implemented inexpensively. So this algorithm looks at the video and generates what we call a fingerprint. And the fingerprint is related to some characteristics of the video that the algorithm looks at. And they're very simple, big characteristics about the video, if I can call them that. We don't look at fine details in the video. We're looking at big elements in the video. And we generate a fingerprint. It's a very small fingerprint. For a video frame, it's 1 byte. We also look at the audio over the duration of that video frame, and we take 1 millisecond slices and we generate a 1 byte fingerprint for each millisecond of audio. And this fingerprint is based on characteristics of the audio. And on an ongoing basis, we're generating a stream of bytes for video and bytes for milliseconds worth of audio as the video and audio are going by. So if we do this at the time when video and audio are known to be in sync, we will then have a stream of fingerprints that corresponds to aligned audio video. Now, this is a very small payload. We're talking about, on the order of 20 bytes per frame. And we send the media along down whatever pathway, and that path can be a distribution path, it can be a contribution path, it can be storage in a file. And we attach to it this very, very small amount of metadata, these fingerprints of the video and audio. And at any point we receive the video and audio, we can take the video and audio and put them in buffers. We can take this fingerprint data And then we can take that video and audio and regenerate fingerprints from it again. We use the same algorithms and we suck up the same information to make a set of fingerprints. And then we step back, or of course, a piece of code steps back, it looks at these fingerprints and correlates them, because the same video and audio will generate the same stream of fingerprints as it goes by, as happened at the encoder. And a little correlator algorithm looks at the fingerprints that came in from the source, and they look at the fingerprints that were just generated from that same content. And they can now establish where video and audio lie today with respect to where they lie or lay when they were first fingerprinted. And at that point, you have a measurement of audio to video delay you can use to light up a light or make a meter move or correct the audio video delay.
So that correction can happen automatically based upon the relationship between where the fingerprints, what the fingerprints say now versus what they said when they were first established.
Precisely right. And you don't have to correct the media if you don't want. You can let it go by. So if you're in a television facility, probably at master control, if you saw the audio video sync was out, you would fix it. You may elsewhere in a facility not fix it, simply light a light to let you know there's a problem, but you're also aware that downstream it will get fixed before it goes out. But the beauty of the system is this, that I fix it at my master control and it goes down the hose to your home. At your home, your receiver can now take the video and audio and make a set of fingerprints. And from those fingerprints, it can establish, with respect to that little bit of metadata that comes in with them, how to fix the audio and video right in the display, the final display and viewing environment.
Wow, that sounds great. When can I buy it?
There you go. Well, I mean, a couple of things here. We're finishing the work in SMPTE now. We have just been through the ballot comment resolution phase of the standard development process. And this is where the broad membership of the technology committee can submit all their comments on the final documents. And we're resolving those comments now. So we expect that certainly this calendar year, we will publish the standard. There's two pieces to the standard. One piece of it is the description of how you generate the fingerprints, the algorithms for analyzing video, analyzing audio, and creating what we call a fingerprint container, but it's a little metadata bucket that gets stuck to the media. The second document is one that describes how to transport that little guy over SDI for use in television plants, over MPEG-2 transport streams for distribution throughout the distribution infrastructure right to the home. Over IP, we transport it as UDP packets over IP, so it can go over IP infrastructures along with any kind of IP media independent of the IP media. Because bear in mind, you only need to have this fingerprint data on hand at the time you play out the media, so it can be sent by a secondary path ahead of the media or just slightly in advance of the media that you're going to watch. And then we also have a document under development which describes how these fingerprints are attached to any kind of media file. This is also kind of ingenious because there's a million kinds of media files, and it's quite problematic to come up with a way to attach something to each and every type of media file. So we've come up with a concept to generate a metadata sidecar file that's used in conjunction with the media file. And it would contain these fingerprints, and when your player, whatever kind of player, plays out the video and audio, the fingerprints can be extracted by an algorithm and compared to the metadata in the fingerprint sidecar file, and the player can then fix audio and video. So the beauty of this system is it wraps around everything in the middle. And if there's lip sync fixing systems in the middle that do or don't work, we don't really care. We know what the alignment was at the head end. We can look at the alignment at the far end and fix it regardless of what's happened in the middle.
Web 9385 in the chat room is asking, what's the range of this correction? Sync misalignment from transcoding can build up over a full film to many seconds.
Well, that's really a function of the product that is realized from the standard. The standard allows you to fingerprint the essence, and you can go looking many, many seconds, minutes ahead and behind where you currently are in your content to try and find the fingerprints associated with that content. The correlator, in fact, is not part of the standard. What we do is we tell you how to generate fingerprints. We tell you how to move them around. The correlation, we feel, is something that's probably best left to commercial space, to competitive feature, feature advantage, and so on. But there's really no limit practically to how far you can look forward or back to try and align video and audio. And also, by the way, on an ongoing basis, you can monitor and observe drift. So if a media has been transcoded and it drifts over time, that can be observed, and equipment can quite readily look at sample rate converting, say, the audio to keep it in sync on an ongoing basis.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's
what
not
about
part of the standard. That's just something downstream of what you can do with the standard.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that the standard is likely to get finalized and published this year sometime. So perhaps next year we might see actual consumer products that implement it, perhaps.
Well, there's one more step, and that is that the standard is an SMPTE standard, and in terms of television, for example, SMPTE standard boundaries exist out to the end of the station.
Yes.
When the station emits over the air, they're in FCC space. When they go down a hose, they're living by many other standards. And when they arrive at the consumer set, it's the CEA who describes the standards associated with the devices. So the next step for SMPTE is to reach out to our liaisons we have established with the different organizations to standardize all the stuff in between SMPTE space and the home, and reach out to them. We've already established liaison to tell them we're developing this, and they've all said, oh, good, 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 tell us. And now that we're just about done, we'll be going back to them and saying, here's our standard. And we're very hopeful that they'll adopt it for use in their spaces, and thus give us a continuous path for this standard right down to the eyeballs and ears of the consumer.
Mm. Well, I sure hope that's true, and I'm really glad to hear that you've got liaisons and connections between the CEA, which, as you say, does establish the standards for the consumer space, and SMPTE, which does establish the standards for the production space and broadcast space. You mentioned to me in some notes offline that this technology would even be applicable to cinema and file-based content, and even outside the world of SMPTE. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Absolutely. Again, if we can attach fingerprint metadata to a piece of content, and let's say this is a YouTube file, and you pull it up to play it, when YouTube streams it to you, it'll stream to you the video and audio you watch. It'll also stream this little metadata file, or it could presumably stream this metadata file to your player, and your player would read this metadata, and it would contain the algorithms to analyze the video and audio it's playing, and it would do the correlation between the metadata, and it could then fix the audio and video right in the player as it's rendering to your screen and your speakers.
Well, I certainly look forward to it. And in fact, I'd like to get you in touch with the engineering staff at TWiT, because I was told before we got on the air here that they're suffering all kinds of lip sync issues as well, depending on whether it's live or pre-recorded or how it's being distributed. So this sounds like a solution that might work for them as well.
Well, that's a whole other thing unto itself. We're certainly hopeful that the fingerprint algorithms we've chosen are sufficiently robust and sufficiently simple and flexible that they will be picked up for use elsewhere. The metadata format as well is very simple. It's nothing particularly special. But again, it's really important to standardize that, so somebody can pick up the standard, they can build the algorithms, they can build the containerization, and they can actually play with something that they know will interoperate with other systems. So if we can get base systems in place in broadcasting, then we may see the uptake of it on the internet side. It's certainly a natural for cinema. It's less needed in theater distribution, cinema per se, only because systems exist and are fairly robust in that environment. But cinema to the home, especially cinematic content delivered over the internet, and we're going to see more and more of this happening, it is a place where the provider can break it quite well through no particular intention of their own. But when you're paying for a nice cinematic experience and you're sitting back and trying to enjoy it as you would in the theater, you deserve perfect presentation, and this is something that could be used to certainly guarantee that. The neat thing about this is you can always implement this, and you can implement other systems, and if they work, it'll never step up. You can turn it off. But you can also leave it turned on as sort of a final check. It's wrapping the entire thing from content origination right to presentation. And if something in the middle breaks, this will just plain fix it.
I'm looking forward to it. It sounds great. We've got bunch more things to talk about in terms of SMPTE standardization. So let's get to that after I take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode, which is NatureBox. Now, it's easy to talk tough about eating right. We all do it, right? But when you're starving at 3 p.m., all cranky and lightheaded, the evil vending machine can seem like your only friend. I know it has for me in the past, that's for sure. Well, don't give in. Keep your eye on looking and feeling great and head on over to naturebox.com/twit. Click on the continue button to choose between 3 subscription options and then place your order. See, this is a snack subscription service that really delivers. Once you're a member, you can select which snacks you'd like in your monthly box. You can even select your dietary needs from vegan, soy-free, gluten-conscious, lactose-free, nut-free, non-GMO. You can also select by taste, one of my favorite features here, savory, sweet, or spicy. NatureBox sends great tasting snacks right to your door with free shipping anywhere in the U.S. Hey, we're talking healthy and satisfying snacks like poppy seed sticks, peppery pistachios, one of my favorites, and over 100 more, all with 0 trans fats, 0 high fructose corn syrup, and nothing artificial. NatureBox is the snack happy gift that keeps on giving. Order a 3, 6, or 12-month subscription for that special someone, family, or friend. Hey, swimsuit weather is here already. It's time to snack smarter. Forget the vending machine and get in shape with healthy, delicious treats like Big Island Pineapple, another one of my faves. So remember, to get 50% off your first box, go to naturebox.com/twit. Stay full, stay strong. Go to naturebox.com/twit. And we thank NatureBox very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. So, Paul Briscoe, media technology consultant to SMPTE and many other organizations, I'm sure. Let's talk about some of the other stuff that SMPTE is currently working on. For example, you mentioned to me offline something about a flat panel calibration standard. Tell me about that.
Well, flat panels. So, a little history, I suppose.
Always a good idea.
Oh, heavens. So in television, we've always had this default behavior for colorimetry. And it's been based upon the simplicity of the original chemistry, in fact, of television. And so in color image pickup tubes, the phosphors that are used are sensitive to certain wavelengths of red, green, and blue, and they're tailored and tuned to produce the color gamut we're familiar with. And in television displays, in the old days, the CRTs, the phosphors themselves would generate certain wavelengths with certain responses, and that colorimetry was standardized. And there's a gamma associated with that, the nonlinearity associated with those pickup devices and those screens, and forever that was the colorimetry of television. Along come flat panel displays that do it differently, and there's all different types of flat panel displays with proprietary phosphor chemistries, proprietary display methods. An LCD is vastly different from a plasma pixel, for example. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, we've lost our ability to understand what a reference monitor is, because the colorimetries now are variable and they're specific to a manufacturer. So it was realized that we need to pay a little bit of attention to flat panel matrix displays. And that's in a number of regards. And first and foremost is figuring out the actual chromaticity and color behavior of these displays and finding a way to standardize how they should look, particularly for mastering. So it's all well and fine to say we have viewing environment problems, but the very first environment that has to be mastered, so to speak, is the mastering QC viewing environment, where you actually are looking at colors in a critical manner. So there's a number of activities underway with regards to flat panel matrix displays, and the standard suite is called ST2080, and it's a suite of documents related to the alignment and, well, the specification of colorimetry, the alignment, maintenance, and calibration of these displays. So we have, for example, one document which describes, of all things, white. And if anybody here is married to someone who likes white paint, you know that white is not a simple subject.
True enough.
Nor is it. Well, actually, there's legendary stories about Steve Jobs and John Ive picking the color white for Apple. It's worth a Google if you're interested. But the actual colorimetry of white, the color temperature of white, is very, very important, as is the chromaticity of the display.
And define for everybody, make sure we understand what the word chromaticity means.
Well, the color behavior, so that if you take 10 displays and put them side by side from different manufacturers, and you send the same RG and B levels into them, they will produce perceptually the same color on all of them.
Okay, got it.
Really important thing, and this
really
is separate from really important and very separate from the hue and the hue and the chroma knobs that people adjust at home to make newscasters bright orange.
Right.
The other thing that goes along with this then is a recommended practice document, which describes how you calibrate these monitors. You have to be able to set them up. You have to be able to measure that they're correct. If they're incorrect, you have to be able to fix that. Bear in mind, in old monitors, the electronics was very simple, and the voltages basically got onto the electron guns to paint the screen fairly directly through simplistic circuits. TVs today put all of the channels typically through a lookup table. So for every given input value, there's a output value that's contained in this map. So the monitors are fairly complicated in how they translate colors onto the screen from the signal. So we need to be able to measure and ensure they're behaving that way they're expected to behave, and ensure that we can calibrate them in a meaningful manner. We also have then, allied to that, is the reference viewing environment. This is something that's long been a variable, and we really need to tighten up and standardize how a viewing environment should look, the color temperature of the viewing environment, the color distractions of the viewing environment, and so on. And so we're doing some work on that as well to try and provide people with something they can fall back on to build a viewing environment that looks the same, from Studio A to Studio B.
Right, or from home to home. We had on the show some time ago Alan Brown from Cinema Quest, who was telling us about viewing environments and how the color of the walls can change how you perceive the colors on the screen to a dramatic degree. He also was talking about bias lighting, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where you put a light behind your flat panel to kind of light up the wall behind your flat panel, presuming it's a neutral gray color, which helps ease eye fatigue.
Absolutely correctly. But in a color grading suite, you have to be very, very certain of these things. But certainly in a viewing environment, I guess I should remember the audience I'm talking to here. These are all people that are very sensitive to their presentation environment. And color and illumination can be very, very distracting to color perception. Now, you can, of course, if you like your room a certain way, you set up the room the way you like, and then you perceptually align your monitor for the colorimetry that makes you happy in that environment. But a colorful room, for example, when you turn the lights up and down, is going to change your color perception radically, whereas a neutral room, when you adjust the room lighting, will not. The old bias light thing, oh my goodness, that takes me back. I can remember the first viewing room I saw years and years ago at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and there was this big, bright white plexi surround around the monitor, and it was explained to me how this helped people establish the right white. And only years later did I find out that the fluorescent tubes behind it were changed kind of arbitrarily, and it was only through good fortune that they put cool white tubes in there. But cool white as a reference white around your monitor made everything look incredibly warm. And it was just the most bizarre thing that somebody had invented and somehow decided that this was the way to do it. But that thinking, thankfully, has evolved. And a lot more attention is being paid to the human visual system and how we perceive imagery. And this is something that's being considered very, very strongly in the discussions around the monitors. Is not just the electro-optical transfer function, the voltage to brightness relationships of the display, but also the human visual perception of that.
Because we should also say we spoke a little bit about EOTF, or electro-optical transfer function, last week. Gamma is an example of that. And there are other ones now being considered since gamma was based on how phosphors in a CRT behave, and we no longer have CRTs. So we no longer have to be limited to how that works. As it happens, the way phosphors behaved on a CRT happened to coincide quite nicely with how the human visual system works, which may be one reason why gamma has survived beyond CRT. Would you agree?
Well, yes, and it's survived for another practical reason, and that is in order to display a gamma-encoded signal correctly, you need to have the right display gamma. So that's why you need to go through these lookup tables with different types of flat panel technology, is to essentially put in place the gamma that you would normally expect from a CRT.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of EOTFs, we've also talked about high dynamic range on this show a number of times, and I've always maintained that is going to be much more impressive and impactful on the image that we see than increasing the pixel density to what is now Ultra HD, or sometimes mistakenly called 4K. What do you see in the way of progress in that regard, high dynamic range and new EOTFs?
So there is work underway to look at high dynamic range. Particularly, we have a standard under development that's going to be called ST2084, and this has to do with the high dynamic range electro-optical transfer function, and also includes considerations of the human visual system. It's not a straightforward thing. In the light levels we've been used to watching TV at, in the 100 nit kind of range, it's not been a very critical factor. As TVs make their way up, towards 1,000 nits now, we're seeing the problem where we have to actually consider more carefully what we do with our dynamic range, because the dynamic range is fairly limited, and as you crank your brightness up, you're spreading your dynamic range. And as we go to HDR now, we need to consider what we're going to do in terms of dealing with the fact that we have a mixed universe of imagery. We have a vast amount of imagery, both in existence and still will be created with regular old color space. And then we're going to have new HDR imagery, and we need to find ways for any display device to display a reasonable rendition of the other. So an HDR display device still has to do a reasonable job of displaying a 709 color space, but also a 709 display has to find a reasonable way to display the HDR image. So it's not just about more brightness. It's about the dynamic range and what we can do with that dynamic range. But it really does turn into maximum brightness at the end of the day, because you spread that dynamic range over available light, and displays just keep going up and up in brightness.
Right, and that, I think, is going to be a super important and very difficult problem to solve as high dynamic range displays start making their way into the market. They aren't really there yet. We do have higher dynamic range. We have sets that can go several hundred nits, maybe even up to 1,000. But still, the content is all graded for 100. That's what they're looking at in the mastering suite. So when they start grading for that higher dynamic range, then we're going to start seeing a real problem in compatibility, backward compatibility, if you will, as you just mentioned. Going if a concurrent set receives that signal with a high dynamic range, what is it going to do with it? And if it's a wider color gamut, it's another problem. How is it going to shrink it down in some reasonable way?
Right, and the problem exists for cartooning the content, which is really one big potential. When you go to a high dynamic range, the opportunity to crank the knobs to fill that dynamic range might mean the content becomes very cartoonish. And in fact, if you look at high dynamic range content right now on a bright display, or even regular dynamic range content for that matter, and in fact particularly on a high dynamic range display, you now see unnatural stretching of the blacks and so on, because you may have a room lit scene with a bright window that normally would be bled out, and all of a sudden you have the dynamic range to actually resolve the window and the room. So what's the net effect? You don't really probably want the net effect to be any different, but in general, the net effect would be to darken the room. So there's a lot of space to be figured out yet, and that's why we're working on these these standards. We actually have a study group as well underway on the high dynamic range ecosystem, because we can come up with little standards that say, oh, here's this piece and here's that piece. But it really is an ecosystem, and we have to figure out how to get from lens to eyeball in a standard manner, and both consider the fact that we have new high dynamic range content to deal with, as well as we have a vast ecosystem of what I'll call legacy dynamic range content. And throughout this, we're having the evolution of monitors with more and more brightness. So the low dynamic range stuff has to work with brighter and brighter monitors in a reasonable manner, while at the same time respecting the high dynamic range content we're going to be seeing with 4K.
Mm-hmm. I'm super happy to hear you've got a study group looking at the entire ecosystem, because I agree with you. It's a complex issue that needs some sort of overarching view so that each part doesn't just sort of go off in their own direction and all of a sudden become incompatible somehow.
Well, the incompatibilities are fairly innocent. The incompatibilities are from people improving a piece of the process without regards for the rest of the ecosystem. And that's not to say we shouldn't be doing that at every opportunity, but the opportunity to consider the ecosystems as we unfold these new ecosystems, such as high dynamic range and such as 4K, is really important, because we can address all these little corner cases. And the study group reports will then illustrate all these different items that need to be considered. So people, at least when they go off and do something wildly on their own on one little piece of the ecosystem, they're doing it in an informed manner of the considerations of the whole ecosystem. And we're discovering more and more that, I mean, it is about ecosystems. It's not about single standards. There was a time. I mean, NTSC video was a single standard, and that described the ecosystem. But today, the ecosystem is far too complex to consider describing in a single standard or document or two.
Speaking of high dynamic range, last week we touched upon the issue of bit depth, and I believe it was you who said that you thought that most TVs these days had 10 bits of resolution in the dynamic range, which determines the dynamic range. And I've been looking around since then, and I do see certainly some 10-bit sets. Sharp has them. But other manufacturers still have at least 8-bit panels. They might use 10-bit processing internally, but by the time it gets to the actual panel for display, in some cases anyway, we're still at 8 bits, which isn't sufficient for high dynamic range by any means.
Yeah, absolutely not. And the tricks they use to deal with the low dynamic range of the panel don't really help us with HDR to a great degree. And one of the tricks with a low resolution panel is you modulate the least significant bit with noise. And that way, at least you don't see contouring. What you may see instead is a bit of soft noise in the shaded field, but you get away from seeing the bits associated with contouring. Now, the nice thing about 8 bits, if we consider 8 or 10-bit component video upstream in the production process, 8 bits is really not enough. You really need 10 bits to avoid any kind of contour artifacts. In the RGB domain at the display, it's not quite as critical. And 8 bits, well, I mean, you can look at an 8-bit panel and see you don't really notice a lot of contouring most of the time. And a lot of people, as I say, dither the LSB and do other little tricks. The other thing they can do, of course, is much higher resolution math. Even though they have an 8-bit panel, they can be doing their math with 12-bit numbers to make sure that they have, they can minimize their errors and so on.
Right.
But at the end of the day, yeah, an 8-bit panel isn't going to do the trick for high dynamic range. On the bright side of the coin, high dynamic range goes along with 4K, and we're not going to see probably 8-bit panels in the 4K domain. There'll be more advanced technology panels, is my guess.
Right. Right. The other problem with high dynamic range that I see is Dolby, for example, made a prototype panel. I think they call it the Pulsar, that can output 4,000 nits, but it has to be water cooled. It's like, whoa, man, I don't think you're going to sell that to the average consumer.
No, but everything has to start somewhere. I mean,
indeed, yeah, you're right.
Things obviously will improve over time. There is a trade-off always generating light, because at some level there's going to be efficiency associated with the light-producing elements. But if you consider the evolution through from incandescent through compact fluorescent now to LED light bulbs, we'll see more and more of the same in displays. So what they have to cool with water today for 3,000 or 4,000 nits, they'll cool eventually passively. The problem with monitors, and an interesting little aside about monitors, you can't really fan cool them because the forced air generates noise. And if you want a really critical viewing environment, you either have to completely sound isolate the device if it's air cooled, or you can't have any cooling at all. So the nice thing about the water cooling, it's a very, very smart move, even though it sounds awkward and horrible. you can put the noisy cooling equipment somewhere else, and you have absolutely silent cooling and very, very high capacity cooling. So even though it sounds kind of prohibitive, it really is a brilliant idea.
You know, that's a great thought. I hadn't thought of that before, because certainly a lot of people complain about Panasonic plasmas when they were being made, and others that have fans in them, and the fans can get really loud. So your point there is very well taken. And maybe water cooling isn't such a bad idea. Certainly they use it in computers, in very high performance computers are water cooled. So maybe it's not so absurd to think that we might someday have a water cooled TV in our living room.
Well, I don't know about that, but certainly passive water cooling is not a big deal at all, and active water cooling with a little pump and a thing is quite common, as you say, as well. I can't imagine how anybody could build a TV set with fans in it with the noise not controlled. I hate to just shake my head in bewilderment, but how on earth people can do that is beyond me. And putting the auto speed controlled fans in is just ridiculous beyond measure. So I'll tell a wonderful little side story. Years ago, I built a TV studio that had a giant monitor wall. I think we had 125 monitors. And it was the very early days of things called under monitor displays. So it was a little one rack unit high box with LEDs that displayed a title such as the cameraman's name or the feed name and so on. And we had these built by a company, a custom job for us. This was 1992, I guess, and they still weren't really common. And they built these things, and they were built to spec, and we installed them and commissioned the studio and everything. They finally got a crew in there and got on air doing the sportscast. And I got this phone call, go down to the studio, there's something wrong. And I head on down, and director calls me over. He says, "What's that sound?" I said, "What sound?" He says, "Go to the sound booth." So I go to the sound booth, and audio guy says, "What's that sound?" I have a listen. Turn up a control room mic they had for doing spots in the control room. The monitor wall was slowly warming up, and all the fans were slowly coming up to speed. And there was this beautiful groan from the monitor wall, this continuous droning of multiple pitch fans going in the monitor wall. And we realized that they'd put automatic speed control in all the fans, and everyone was a different temperature. And it was this cacophony of drone in the control room.
Man.
So
I immediately, what I would have done was gone in there with a recorder and recorded that sound.
And just bizarre. Anyway, how anybody could build a monitor with a fan in it that you can hear anymore, at least a serious monitor, it just leaves me cold.
Yeah, understood.
So Dolby's pretty smart.
Yeah, okay, I got you. I understand completely. Let's spend a minute or two on high frame rates, because that's another thing that we expect to see coming with UHD TV or 4K. Certainly 60 frames per second, maybe even 120. What do you think?
Well, I think 120 is absolutely necessary. There's a bit of a multivariable equation with 4K, and it has to do with your ability to resolve the pixels, the resultant viewing distance, and the peripheral vision that the display occupies. So if you want to sit at a reasonably comfortable distance from the display, you need a good-sized display with 4K if you want to be able to resolve the full pixel resolution available to you. And you're sufficiently close to the display that it's occupying a good deal of your peripheral vision. This is all fine. It's what you want is a nice immersive experience. It's colorful, it's vibrant, you're right in the picture. However, our human visual system is attuned to reducing flicker in a fairly narrow range central to our vision. And it's not so good at reducing flicker in our peripheral vision. And if you think back to any time you've seen a TV, an old-fashioned scanning TV out of the corner of your eye, you've probably noticed the screen was a little more flickery than when you looked right at it. And this is a problem when you're watching 4K at, say, 30 frames per second, is the peripheral vision, the edges of the screen are absolutely jerking along in your peripheral vision. And at 60 frames per second, they're not jerking so much, but they're obviously stuttering. And you really need to get to 120 frames per second before you see an entirely smooth image everywhere in your field of vision.
Wow,
So,
you know, that's something I hadn't thought of that before, but it's certainly true that for HD TV, the general recommendation is sitting 3 screen heights back from the screen, which gives you a 30-degree field of view in the screen. UHD, it's 1.5 screen heights back, which gives you a 60-degree field of vision. So I hadn't thought of this before, but if your peripheral vision behaves that way, then of course you're going to see a lot more flickeriness out of the corner of your eye, and it's going to take you out of the immersive experience.
exactly. And not only that, it's going to destroy motion content. You know, you forget suspension of disbelief. something's going to fly in from the left and it's going to jerk its way in and become smooth as it comes into your field of view and become jerky on the way out. So the distraction level, I think, is extremely high, the potential for it. So that's why we're examining high frame rates in the case of UHD TV, because we feel they're absolutely necessary.
Mm. Do you think we will get 120 frames per second? I mean, seems
Absolutely.
like a lot. I know there are there are experiments being done on that, and certain cameras can do it, but not a lot.
No, but it's not that many years ago when we couldn't do any of this stuff. So I have no doubt that this stuff can be done, and I have no doubt that it'll become commercially very, very viable, and in the not too distant future as well. I mean, things are just moving at such a rate.
Such a rate, no question about that. Well, listen, we have a few minutes left, and there's one thing left that I really want to make sure we talk about, which you mentioned to me. The coding of tactile essence. Now we've been talking about audio and video here, lip sync issues, colorimetry, pixel resolution, high dynamic range, all that stuff. But sight and sound are only two of our five senses. Are you suggesting that the TV of the future might in fact involve other senses?
Well, in our attempt to look forward at all times, SMPT has recognized that we have other senses, and it's probably reasonable that they will be stimulated in some way or another at some point in time. And so to standardize the method of carriage and coding and carriage of that tactile essence seems to be a reasonable thing to do. There is a motivator. There are some technologies that exist right now that deliver physical sensation to you. If you think back to Sense Around, I guess it was in the 1970s. I was a kid, and I can remember the theater rumbling. So the under seat thumper thing is one possibility.
And we certainly have that today with D-Box and Butt Kicker and these sort of motion simulator, motion actuator things that some people put in their home theaters now. The AMC Prime Theater down the street from me has a seat rumbler in each seat, which fortunately you can turn off because I personally hate it. But but there's another example.
Precisely right. And John Waters must be in heaven thinking about what he can do with some smell-o-vision now. We should probably call him. We should probably call him up and tell him we're doing this standard, and maybe he'll rise to the occasion. I remember the sniff card thing that he did many eons ago. And I dare say it's probably a boon to the future internet porn industry as well.
That reminds me, not of porn, well, sort of. At CES many years ago, I ran across a device which was this box, and it had like 64 vials of liquid, little jars of liquid that had different scents. They were sort of the root sense elements, and you could send it a USB signal, a message, and it would combine these scents in different ways to give you oranges or whatever. And you could even send that over the internet to somebody else far away who had a similar device and have smell-o-vision between them. We also see this on Disney's California Adventure ride called Soaring Over California. I don't know if you've ever been on that, but it's a wraparound screen, and you're in a gondola and you're flying over California. And when you're flying over the orange groves, they pump orange scent into the room. So this is not unheard of.
Well, what do you smell when you fly over LA? or
Yeah.
Marin County? Oh, never mind.
Very
Marin
good
County.
question.
So listen, since you did an ad, I feel compelled. I should say to people, you're more than welcome to go to www.smpte.org to see what we're doing. For those of you who aren't members, we'd love you to become members. There's huge advantage to being a member of SMPTE. And the website tells you all about our standards activity, and as members, you're entitled to participate. So please drop over to SMPTE.org.
And even if you're not a professional in the industry, but an interested consumer, as many of my audience are, certainly you can find a ton of great information there about the standards that are being considered and that are already set, and what to look for in the future and all that sort of stuff. It is a great resource. I totally agree.
Oh, absolutely. And times have changed. I mean, there was a time when theater owners were the only places where cinematic content was really of importance. And today, cinematic content is in the hands of the consumer. And the audience for this program, for example, are all people that should be going to SMPTE.org just to see what's going on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Does SMPTE have much to do? Do they spend much time on online content, YouTube, Netflix, Twit, for example?
Yes, yes, and yes. SMPTE has a vast online education program, and SMPTE conducts online webinars. Many SMPTE committee, SMPTE section meetings are streamed and are available online. And like I say, go to the website and click on education. You'll see for yourself.
Mm-hmm. I've been to and I've attended, so to speak, a number of SMPTE webinars, which are great because you can just sit in your room, in my office in this case, and get an hour of something for about high dynamic range. Or I saw one once on holographic TV. I mean, it was really great. So it is a wonderful resource, and I do recommend that people check it out. So, well, great. I mean, there it is. We've come to the end of a fascinating hour, and I want to thank you so much for being here again, second week in a row, to talk about so many great things that are happening that we can expect to see coming down the pike. And your perspective is unique and greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy to join you anytime. It's been my pleasure, Scott.
Great. As Paul was just saying, and me too, you can go to smpte.org and learn all about what SMPTE's doing. You can find me, of course, at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott, also at avsforum. And you can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here on twit.tv. Also on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, I will be at CE Week, a mid-year industry-wide check-in in New York City. It's sort of a micro CES in a way. There will be quite a few booths, of course, not nearly as many as at CES, but a fair number. And I will be roaming the show floor, doing interviews with people in their booths about what they're showing here now that we're at mid-year. So that will get all assembled and put together, hopefully in time to be broadcast at this time. So I do hope you will tune in for that. I'll still be in New York at the time, but it should be a fascinating look at what is going on in the CE industry as far as audio and video are concerned, since after all, this is Home Theater Geeks. But I do hope you'll tune in and check that out. It should be a great show. Until then, geek out.